Speaking after the lecture of Dr. Steven is complicated, but I'm going to try to take part of his speech and incorporate it into mine. I'm trying to figure out how the clicker works before we start. Oh, I have to click on the red button? Okay. I'm learning the technical course of how to operate the clicker. I think we, since yesterday and since earlier today, have been speaking a lot about the climate events that are happening and that was predicted to 2030, and we already are experiencing those climate events in 2023 and 24. They are becoming more and more frequent. As you heard from the speech of Dr. Stephen Cohen, there was a case study in New York and the whole preparation that they carried out. And ultimately, we are talking about resilience. Making more resilient cities and more resilient grids. Currently, this is the trendy word regarding what is happening out there. As an engineer, I have to introduce to you an agenda, a set of topics that I'm going to discuss. So that is going to be my first slide. So the idea today is to share with you a contextualization of climate change, identification of climate risks, the impacts that these climate changes have in the grid, and I would like to share with you as well a resilience plan that we have been working on. Yesterday I was talking to Vivia and Marcia. I was showing them my presentation, and I was talking about communication, and they told me, we didn't know that you were working with resilience plans yet. It is not that we are working with resilience plans. Eletropaulo purchased us in 2018, and we started working on resilience plans for 2019. So that is not a very brand new topic. We are really worried about how to take this information to people. And afterwards, we're going to have a conclusion. I have 35 minutes, and my commitment is to do my presentation in 25 minutes and leave 10 minutes for questions. So I'll make a brief introduction. Can I show you the video? The National Meteorological Institute issued a warning of storms in 11 states and the federal districts during the weekend. Today we had another day of intensive heat in most of the country. Rio de Janeiro recorded a record of thermal sensation, 62 degrees. I wanted to start with this video because even though I'm an electrical engineer, my topic is climate now. So I have to understand what is going to happen to climate. My son asked me, are you a director of generation operations of an electrical company, or do you work with climate? But I do have to start working with climate for my job. And so I was searching for materials. There was a text that drew my attention. It said that that happened in November 17th, the day that we had this thermal sensation of almost 60 degrees in Rio de Janeiro. And on November 18th, we had the big storms. After days with very high temperatures, on the next 5 days, we're going to have a storm. And that reminded me of the time that I lived in Goiás before I started living in Rio. It is in the Midwest of Brazil. The summer lasts 6 months and it rains every day. And during the day, we have 35 to 40 degrees Celsius heat, and when we arrive at 4 p.m., then we have a huge storm every day. At the time, I was thinking about how to recover operation, but what was really in the background of these climate events? And I would like to share with you a slide of Climatempo that Pedro presented during the Enel workshop. And it's very important that we notice in the two charts, we can identify how in the last 20 to 30 years, the temperature variation has been huge, very significant. When we talk about 1950 onwards, you can see a huge increase. Before 1950, we had the pre-industrial era, and you can see how temperature is increasing exponentially from the 1950s onwards. And here we see in the last 20 to 30 years how this difference in temperature has evolved, reaching the peak, the record from 2023 that was 1.48 degrees.
And in 2015, we had the Paris Agreement, and it decided that the limit would be 2.5. And we expected that in 2030, but it arrived in 2023. And here in Rio, 1.5 degrees Celsius in difference, it's 40 to 41 degrees. If you are able to endure 40 degrees Celsius, you're able to endure 41.5. But this is concerning the global average. So when we're talking about this global average, is more than 10%. So this is very meaningful. So this is very important, because what does that mean? And what are we facing? Strong climate events, much more frequent than before. Mayor Axel was commenting yesterday that Niterói, the city of Niterói, has faced at least 3 of them. And I've lived in Goiás. In 2019, we saw many disasters, climate disasters. And of course, that has an impact in our grid. It has an impact on our business. We have longer occurrences and a greater frequency. But this is not happening only in Brazil. I collected some news from last year. For now, we have rainfall here, but in the United States, they were facing strong cold weather in Europe as well. So definitely the changes are very strong and with different dimensions in terms of rainfall, temperature, winds, storms, lightnings. So this debate is very important. This is a reality. This is not something that is going to happen in the future. It's here now, and we have to live with that. This is a reality as we had with COVID. So climate change is a reality for us, and we have to work with it. So what does it mean to us? We had the November 3rd in São Paulo and November 18th in Rio. Marcia was commenting yesterday that in November we were expecting in São Paulo 50 kilometer per hour winds, but they were much more, the winds were much more fast, 150 kilometers per hour. I had never seen a storm like that. And that had an impact on our grid. And in the case of Rio, in the city of Cabo Frio, they faced winds with over 160 kilometers per hour. This region in the neighborhood of Barra da Tijuca, 105 kilometers. In Niterói, 137 kilometers per hour. We are technicians and we have made projections for the future in the past, but we only considered 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers. So our forecasts are not prepared for this kind of event. So this is the kind of risk we are talking about. It's bringing different kinds of impact on our grids and networks. Trees falling on our grid. I remember that we faced so much water, so much rainfall in Itaparuna that we only started to work 4 hours later. That's when our vehicles could start to drive. Just for you to understand what was happening. Of course, these are changes. We are long failures. And we have to be prepared. That's why that question by Ricardo to Professor Stephen was so important. With all this change, when people are facing 1 week with this power outage, how to face that? But this is now a reality. We have to share that with the public. Other examples. Yesterday, we invited 3 mayors. That was part of our strategy. We had the mayor of the city of Areal, the city of Niterói, and the city of Paraty. And why these 3 mayors if we have 66 city halls? Areal is representing all of the cities with a high concentration of people, with lots of trees. When we go to Areal, this is representing our mountains. We have Areal, Petrópolis, Teresópolis, Rio do Vale Preto. The configuration in our system is totally different in the mountains when we compare that to Niterói, for instance. We have different standards of constructions. And when we go to Paraty, we are at the coast, the green coast in Rio. With Angra dos Reis, Paraty, it's a totally different configuration. different realities with the same utility company, with different technologies. And they are submitted to the same events, the same climate events. And this is the greatest challenge to us. The challenge to the sector. So my team and I, we have to be responsible for that. Some other examples about that. And what was the impact on São Paulo and Rio? In the case of São Paulo, we had 2.5 million clients with power outage. In the case of Rio, it was 1.2. I've worked for Eletropaulo, and when we had many clients facing power outage, they were 400,000. I went to the office to see how I could work because 2.5 million clients were facing that. I had to do something. And then I came to Rio 2 weeks later. I remember that internally we compared that to other events, and the maximum we had faced was the storm in Petrópolis with 150,000 clients. So in 10 years, when we had that disaster in Petrópolis, we came from 150,000 to 2 million. The event was much more complex. Marcia was commenting yesterday. We had to rebuild 203 kilometers of grid, longer distance than going from Rio to Paraty. In the case of Rio, we had to rebuild more than 35 kilometers of grid, more than 150 light posts with 130 transformators, 300 points of cables, and more than 1,000 occurrences connected to plants. So this is an operation that we normally use 300 teams, but we had to deploy 1,000 teams to contain everything that was happening. Okay, I've cried a lot, but I have to understand, as the responsible for the grid, that the climate change is here. I have to stop weeping. I have to adapt to that. And I have to adapt the system and the operations. So we must have this resilience plan to face what's happening. Now that we are aware of climate change with greater events, with much more frequency, with extreme temperatures, we used to think, oh, it's the rainfall. And a friend of mine tells me, you're always crying. When there's heat, you're crying because there's heat. When there's rainfall, you cry because there's rainfall. The problem is not heat and rainfall. The problem is the extremes. When you have this 60-degree temperature, of course, when you project the grid, you have to understand the energy load. So the grid is not projected for 100% of the air conditioners in Niterói are on at the same time. No city is projected for that. We have the residence demand, we have the industrial demand, and they have different times during the day. But when you are using ACs all at the same time, you are diminishing the life of the converters, the grid, and so on. So we have this peak of demand, and then on the next day you have a wind with 160 kilometers per hour. So the problem is the extremes. So we have an increase in failures, a great impact in productivity and on the population, on the country. So we must build this resilience plan. How to make this grid more resilient? Here in Rio, it's very important to have the vegetation management because 90% of our problems are associated to trees. So it's very important within this resilience plan to consider that. So the operations must be resilient as well. We have to have contingency plans and the grid must be better prepared. Yesterday we were talking about the automation of the grid so that we can have shorter response times. And we also should consider N-1. So if I'm feeding this circuit for a home, that home should have a different alternative in terms of energy feeding. If I lose one, I can use the other. So that is the concept that we should use. And we've been defining what is the grid resilience. It should be adapted to these events so that we have less failures, so that it's able to support the events, and so that it's more flexible. When the event happens, we are able to recover in a shorter period of time. So at Enel Brazil, we are starting with the resilience plans that were developed in Italy and other countries. For instance, in Romania, we had the change of the legislation to support the plans. And you asked Dr. Steve, where did you find the money to implement New York plan? Of course, we have to find the money to develop smart cities, sustainable cities, resilient networks. As a society, we must ask where we will find the money to prepare, because you need strong investments, especially in the electrical sector, which is capital intensive. So we need a lot of investments. So we also use this Enel workshop as a basis, and also the ABRADE R&D plan. Yesterday I asked this question to Walter. Within this model, we have this project and the idea here is to invite different companies and also the academia, private companies, because we have to understand how to develop models that may assess climate change and forecast climate change. So that we can have forecasts for 10 years, 15 years, so that later on with our solution analysis concerning the grid, we may include what is being predicted. Yesterday we were commenting about that. We are talking about 50 kilometers of grid. So we are not able to change it in 1 year. We need 10 to 15 days. So that's why we must understand how the events are going to happen so that we can change our solutions and our standards of construction. So we have this project for that. So for instance, we have 3 concessions with 3 types of grids. We have this old grid with NUA. We have this one which is more insulated, which is protected against trees. And of course, we have the underground grid. In the case of Rio, we have 32,000 kilometers of grid with this NUA grid, and we have 5.6 thousand with protected grid and 197 only with underground grid. So this is the challenge, how to convert this grid into a more resilient grid due to the climate events. So what are we doing? We are modeling and we are designing. And we are using artificial intelligence. So on the one hand, we have all the critical factors in our circuits with the type of failures, amount of clients, possibility of maneuver, with that concept of having backups. So all of the circuits must have from 3 to 4 possibilities of backup. So starting from that and with different inputs such as hierarchy of priorities, institutional part, where the firefighters are, where are the policemen, considering that in the model, the digitalization level and the smart grid concept as well.
And in addition to this, within the model, we have this whole part of the risk map of trees, the impact of the effects of trees falling, if they are above or below the grid. We are in close contact with the municipal government, and they have digitalized all of the trees in Niterói if they are located above or below the grid. What is the tree's condition? What is the tree's health? So with them, we are planning all of our new grids with this information that the City Hall of Niterói gave us. And we want to take to other municipal governments the same information. Within this whole model, we use the famous model of the 4 R's, which was invented 15 to 20 years ago. So you have to be prepared for response, reestablishment, recovery, risk prevention, and readiness in your system. So the idea is to have a model that is able to include these 4 R's of the resilience model. The tree model, as I told you, we are sharing the information from the municipal government with other utilities companies. When we are talking about trees that are on the same side of the streets as the grid, if they are below 5 meters tall, we have almost zero impact in our grid. When we start having trees above 5 meters up to 8 meters, their impact is average. It's a moderate impact because we have to work on keeping the tree below the grid. So we have to prune those trees so they are not too tall. This is what should be done. And when we have trees that are above 8 meters tall, in Niterói we have many trees which grow too much and they are located next to the grid. And we should have a special plan for those trees that are above 8 meters tall. It is not enough just to prune them, just to trim them. So I think what we can do is remove part of the tree leaves which are closer to our grid. So we remove part of the tree top. And also when the tree is located across the street from our grid, if it is below 5 meters, it's zero risk. The ones that are above 5 meters tall, they have moderate impact, and the same goes for trees that are above 8 meters tall. And this tree handling plan has to be within the models that we are developing. Since we have been talking about this, I brought you some images of trees that are on the same side of the street as our grid and trees that are across the street. This tree, for example, here is taller than 5 meters, even though we have isolated cables that didn't do the trick. And we basically had to rebuild the network. So each type of grid has its standards. We have some protection against low risk, moderate risk, and high risk plant, and also the cost, the capex that we use for rebuilding that grid. We needed big investments to maintain the democratization of energy. And this kind of grid is the grid that offers the least amount of climate risks. We have a pilot project where we have many constructive solutions that we are suggesting. In the case of Rio, we have a pilot for 2024 where we have an additional investment to our ordinary investment, precisely to evaluate the different solutions that we are suggesting. And also in this communication process, it is important to analyze the subsidies. Enel has just started a process of public consultation, and in the end of 2025, we're going to have subsidies from the regulatory standpoint, and we can analyze how to modernize our regulation to allow including in this regulation the concept of grid resilience. This is what I was mentioning on the pilot plan for 2024. We have an additional capex of 10 million euros. And this year, we are going to bring 1,000 kilometers of grid, about 2,000 new remote controls for the digitalization of this grid, and the total plan until 2028 is to have 6 new substations. But only in the pilot project we have 10 million euros. We have some estimates of over 300 million euros until 2028. That is what we predict. With this, we would get to 750,000 clients with isolated grids. Enel Rio has 3 million clients, so a little less than 30% of our clients. That is why I mentioned this question of where this money is going to come from. Within this plan, we also have this effort of searching for investments. Dr. Steven was mentioning just that. It may come from the federal investments that we call them the lost funds that allow us to invest on our grid. The famous CDE, which was part of our fees, part of our sectoral tariffs. So within the tariffs, it represents 15 million reais a year. This is the Rio tariff that is allocated to a fund that is used for the development in the northwest of Brazil. So part of this investment could be subsidized by this CDE. We already have this fund, but in order to do this, we would have to change the regulation. We have another case at the municipal level. In the municipal government, we have COSIP, which is the public lighting fee, and most of the city halls have a fund that can be used to allocate in resilience projects. So we may invest on some grids through this fund. For example, I wanted to share with you here the example with Salas in Santa Catarina in the south of Brazil. We have incentivized projects of sports and culture through the ICMS tax. They are using the same concept of using the ICMS tax for resilience projects for the grid. This is something that is ongoing right now. These are different ways to finance this concept of resilience. I'm not sure if you saw it, or had the opportunity to participate, but there was a workshop from Enel, and the Brazilian named Tiago works at a group of Enel Energy, but he is responsible for a company in the United States, and he shared at this opportunity, he shared that the companies are prepared for smaller climate events, and this is already funded by the tariff. There is a section of the tariff that pays for that, and for bigger events, they have other financing sources. Additionally to this, they already have agreements among states, among electrical energy companies, in order to have resource loans. Vehicles, electrical technicians. In the case of Rio, for example, we have that as our forecast, but in Goiás, we did not have any plans to have that. So I could make a partnership with another electrical energy supplier to share our teams and our resources. And as a society, these are things we have to work on to have resilience programs in our grids. Basically, I just wanted to give you an overview on what we have been doing in terms of resilience. what we have advanced, what we will do in 2024 in the case of Rio, but also in São Paulo, because São Paulo also has a pilot in resilience. Ceará also has a plan. And this is the path that we have been developing to test and to see what would be the constructive solutions that we can implement in order to have better resilience. Okay, I hope my accent was not a problem. I hope that you could understand me and understand the ideas that I gave you today. I spoke a little bit faster because I wanted to share all of the information that I brought, and I wanted to let the 10 minutes for questions. Many people on our team are seeing this for the first time as you are. I think Axel's concern yesterday regarding communication is very relevant. We do have to change our communication. We have to communicate more and be more open, be more spontaneous in the sense, understanding that we're not going to reach this goal by ourselves. We have to sit around the same table. We have to discuss things openly. And together we will be able to create a solution for these problems. I would like to take this chance that Felipe is here. And through Felipe, we have had this process of mediation between the concessionaires and the municipalities. Dr. Steve was talking a lot about this, how the combination of the public power and the private power will help us face what is happening. If we do it by ourselves, we're not going to be able to achieve our goals. But if we work together, this is a reality.